The Atlantic Ocean holds many dark secrets in its crushing depths, but few are as chilling as the mystery found on the Diamond Shoals. It was a cold, gray morning in January 1921 when the Coast Guard personnel stationed at Cape Hatteras spotted the massive shape of a 5-masted schooner trapped on the treacherous sandbars. The sails were set, and the ship looked ready to sail. But something was terribly wrong. There was no movement on the deck, and no smoke rising from the galley. The ship stood silent and motionless against the crashing waves, like a tombstone marking a watery grave. The eerie stillness of the scene sent shivers down the spines of the men watching from the shore, because the Diamond Shoals was known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. This was the Carroll A Deering, and it was about to become one of the greatest maritime mysteries in American history. The conditions on the water were ferocious, preventing any immediate rescue attempts by the brave men of the Coast Guard. For days, the ocean battered the hull of the trapped schooner, while the waves crashed over her deck with violent intent. The rescuers could only watch through their binoculars, waiting for a break in the storm, so they could investigate the silent vessel. They saw no distress signals and no crew members waving for help, which only deepened the growing sense of dread. The ship seemed abandoned, yet it held its position on the dangerous shoals, as if waiting for someone to uncover its horrifying truth. The local residents of North Carolina whispered that the ship looked cursed, and that perhaps something unnatural had claimed the souls of those on board before the ship ever struck the sand. When the weather finally broke on February 4th, the rescuers were able to approach the stranded vessel. The silence that greeted them as they climbed aboard was heavy and oppressive. The ship was completely deserted. There was not a single human soul to be found from the bow to the stern. However, the scene they discovered in the galley was the most unsettling aspect of the entire investigation. Food was laid out on the stove and tables, as if the crew had been just moments away from sitting down to a meal. It appeared that they had vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving their sustenance behind. This discovery suggested that whatever happened to the crew occurred suddenly and without warning, interrupting the most mundane of daily activities. The investigation of the ship revealed more puzzling details that defied logical explanation. The personal effects of the crew were gone, along with the critical navigational equipment and the ship logs. The steering equipment was damaged, and the rudder swung uselessly in the water. Yet the most chilling discovery was the only living creature left on the entire massive vessel. A 6-toed cat was found wandering the empty decks, meowing into the void. The presence of the cat added a surreal layer to the mystery. Why would the crew take the time to save themselves and their personal items, but leave the ship mascot behind? The cat offered no answers, staring back at the rescuers with wide, unblinking eyes that had witnessed the terror that befell the crew. To understand the horror of the final days of the Carroll A Deering, we must look back to its origins. The ship was a magnificent schooner built in Bath, Maine, just 2 years prior, in 1919. It was a vessel designed for commerce and profit, representing the pinnacle of wooden ship construction of its time. The owners had high hopes for the Deering, but from the very beginning, there were whispers of bad luck. The maritime world is one filled with superstition and omens, and many sailors believed that a ship carried a soul. As the Deering prepared for its voyage from Norfolk, Virginia, to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in August 1920, heavy clouds of unease seemed to gather around the mission. The original master of the ship was Captain William Merritt, a man respected for his experience. Captain William Merritt fell ill shortly before the ship was scheduled to depart, and he had to be replaced at the last minute. This sudden change in leadership was the first domino to fall in a series of unfortunate events. The owners hired Captain Willis B. Wormel, a retired veteran of the sea, to take command. Captain Wormel was 66 years old and a man of strict discipline and old-world values. He did not want to go back to sea, but he needed the money and accepted the commission with reluctance. He was a capable sailor, but his eyesight was failing, and he was stepping into a crew that he did not know. The dynamic on the ship was already fractured before they even left the port, setting the stage for conflict. The man serving as the first mate was Charles B. McClellan. He was a seasoned sailor, but he had a reputation for a volatile temper and a fondness for alcohol. McClellan had expected to be promoted to captain when Merritt fell ill, and he was visibly bitter when the owners brought in the elderly Captain Wormel instead. The tension between the strict old captain and the resentful first mate was palpable from the moment the ship set sail. The crew was a mix of different nationalities, including Danes, Finns, and men from the United States. This cultural mix added another layer of complexity to the social hierarchy. On board the confined space of the wooden vessel, as they sailed towards South America, the resentment festered in the humid, salt air. The journey to Rio de Janeiro was fraught with difficulty, and the friction between Captain Wormel and first mate McClellan intensified. Upon arriving in Brazil, the situation deteriorated further. Captain Wormel spoke to other captains in the port and expressed his deep concern about the behavior of his crew. He described them as an unruly bunch who had no respect for authority. He was particularly worried about McClellan, who he felt was undermining his command at every turn. The atmosphere on the Carroll A Deering was toxic. It was a floating powder keg waiting for a spark. While the ship offloaded its cargo of coal, the captain wrote letters home that hinted at his fear. He felt isolated and surrounded by men he could not trust. while in Rio de Janeiro, a disturbing incident occurred that foreshadowed the violence to come. Captain Wormel met with an old friend, Captain Goodwin, and confided in him. He told Goodwin that the engineer was the only man on board he could trust with his life. This statement revealed the depth of his paranoia and the danger he felt he was in. The divide between the officers and the crew had become a chasm. The crew was often seen drinking and carousing in the seedy port bars of Rio, while the captain stayed on board or met with other officers. The discipline that was essential for survival at sea had completely broken down, leaving a lawless environment where hatred could grow unchecked. The Carroll A Deering left Rio de Janeiro in early December 1920, but the captain had not been able to replace the crew he feared so much. They were heading back to the United States, stopping first in Barbados for orders. During the voyage north, the tension likely reached a boiling point. The vast emptiness of the Atlantic Ocean can play tricks on the mind, and for men trapped on a ship with their enemies, there is no escape. Every order given by Captain Wormel was likely met with sneers and slow compliance. The first mate, McClellan, was reportedly drinking heavily despite the prohibition against it on duty. The ship was sailing through calm waters, but a human storm was raging below the decks. The schooner arrived in Barbados for supplies on January 9th, 1921. It was here that the final public act of this tragedy played out. Captain Wormel again complained to local officials about his crew. He seemed exhausted and aged beyond his years, worn down by the constant stress of the voyage. He told anyone who would listen that he had to do all the navigation himself because he could not trust his first mate. Meanwhile, Charles McClellan was found in a local tavern boasting that he was the real captain of the ship and that the old man was incompetent. McClellan was arrested for being drunk and disorderly, and Captain Wormel had to bail him out of jail. Captain Wormel forgiving his insubordinate first mate and bailing him out of jail was an act of mercy that may have sealed his fate. The captain reportedly told the jailers that he could not sail the ship without McClellan, despite their hatred for each other. It was a fatal dependency. When the Carroll A Deering left Barbados on January 9th, it sailed out of the harbor and into oblivion. This was the last time anyone saw Captain Willis B. Wormel alive on land. The ship turned its bow north toward the United States, entering a stretch of ocean that would soon become famous for swallowing ships whole. The people of Barbados watched the sails disappear over the horizon, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. The voyage north from Barbados should have been routine, but the Atlantic Ocean in winter is rarely forgiving. As the days turned into weeks, there was no word from the Deering. Then, on January 29th, a lightship keeper near Cape Lookout, North Carolina, spotted a 5-masted schooner. The vessel hailed the lightship, and a man on the deck shouted through a megaphone. He reported that the ship had lost its anchors in a storm and asked the lightship to relay a message to the owners. But there was something wrong with the man shouting the message. The lightship keeper later testified that the man did not look or sound like an officer. He had red hair and spoke with a foreign accent. The lightship keeper noticed other strange details during this brief encounter. The crew seemed to be milling about on the quarterdeck, an area usually reserved for officers. This was a severe breach of maritime protocol and suggested that the chain of command had completely collapsed. The man with the red hair was acting as the spokesperson, while the actual officers were nowhere to be seen. Was Captain Wormill already dead at this point? Was First Mate McClellan leading a mutiny? The lightship keeper could do nothing but watch as the schooner drifted away into the mist, heading directly toward the dangerous sands of the Diamond Shoals. It was a ghostly encounter that provided the last known communication from the vessel. Just a day later, another vessel passed a schooner that matched the description of the Carroll A Deering. The crew of this passing ship saw the schooner sailing on a strange course. It was heading straight for the Diamond Shoals, with all sails set. The witnesses thought it was odd that a ship would be sailing so recklessly near such a notorious hazard. They saw no one at the wheel and no one on the decks. It was as if the ship was being guided by an invisible hand steering it toward its own destruction. The phantom vessel continued on its suicide course, silent and determined, until it struck the Outer Banks with a grounding shudder that would have been felt through the entire frame. The grounding of the ship on January 31st, 1921, marked the end of the voyage, but the beginning of the mystery, when the Coast Guard finally boarded days later. They found the scene of interruption described earlier: the prepared food, the missing boats, and the abandoned cat painted a picture of a sudden panic. But there was no sign of violence. There was no blood on the decks and no bullet holes in the wood. If there had been a mutiny, where were the bodies? If they had abandoned ship in the lifeboats, where did they go? The sea conditions were rough, but the lifeboats were sturdy. It was as if the ocean had simply opened up and swallowed the men, leaving the ship behind as a hollow shell. The United States government launched a massive investigation into the disappearance of the crew. This was not just a maritime accident. It was a potential crime involving American citizens. The investigation was extensive and involved 5 different government departments, including the Department of Justice. A young J. Edgar Hoover, who would later become the famous director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was involved in the case. The agents interviewed the families of the crew, the people in Barbados, and the lightship keeper. They tried to piece together the timeline of the final voyage, but every lead seemed to end in a question mark. The lack of physical evidence frustrated the investigators at every turn. One of the primary theories pursued by the investigators was mutiny. The friction between Captain Wormill and First Mate McClellan was well documented. The testimony from the lightship keeper about the red-haired man and the crew on the quarterdeck strongly supported this idea. It was believed that the crew had risen up, killed the officers, and taken control of the ship. However, this theory did not explain why they would then abandon the ship on the shoals. If they had successfully taken the ship, they could have sailed it to a remote port and sold the cargo. Abandoning it on the treacherous Diamond Shoals seemed like a foolish move for men who wanted to profit from their crime. Another theory that gained traction was the involvement of pirates or rum runners. Prohibition was in full effect in the United States in 1921, and the waters off the coast were teeming with smugglers. Some believed that the Carroll A Deering had been hijacked by rum runners who needed a fast ship to transport their illegal liquor. The theory suggested that the crew was murdered and dumped overboard, and the ship was taken. But why run it aground? Perhaps they were spotted by the Coast Guard and panicked. The proximity to the shore made this theory plausible. But again, there was no hard evidence. No liquor was found on board, and the cargo of coal was untouched. A more political theory involved the fear of Bolshevism. The Red Scare was gripping America in the early 1920s, and there was a pervasive fear of communist agitators. Since the Deering had a multinational crew and had visited foreign ports, some investigators wondered if radical political elements were involved. There were rumors that a Russian organization was hijacking American ships to strike a blow against capitalism. The red-haired man who hailed the lightship was scrutinized through this lens. Was he a communist agitator who had incited the crew to rebellion? This theory reflected the paranoia of the era more than the facts of the case, but it showed how desperate the authorities were for an answer. While the government looked for human culprits, the public began to look toward the supernatural. The area where the ship was found is part of what is now known as the Bermuda Triangle. While the term had not yet been coined, the reputation of the waters was well established. Sailors spoke of rogue waves, magnetic anomalies, and sea monsters. The fact that the crew vanished without a trace, leaving a warm meal behind, fit perfectly with the lore of the unexplained. Stories began to circulate that the Deering had sailed through a tier in reality, or had been boarded by entities not of this world. The ghost ship label was affixed to the Deering, and it stuck. In April 1921, a message in a bottle was discovered on a beach in North Carolina. The note was scrawled on a piece of paper and read simply, "Deering, captured by oil-burning boat, something like chaser, taking off everything, handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over ship, no chance to make escape. Find her, please, notify Headquarters Deering. The discovery of the bottle caused a sensation. It seemed to confirm the piracy theory. However, the handwriting was analyzed, and later a local man confessed to forging the note, hoping to get a job at the lighthouse station. By impressing the authorities, the hoax only added to the confusion and heartache of the families waiting for news. Despite the extensive investigation, the official inquiry was closed in late 1922 without a definitive conclusion. The disappearance of the crew of the Carroll A Deering remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the sea. The ship itself did not survive much longer. It was declared a hazard to navigation and was dynamited by the authorities. The massive wooden hull was blown apart, sending splinters of the cursed vessel into the sky. The shattered remains washed ashore for years afterward. Locals collected the wood, using the timber to build houses and barns. It is said that the spirit of the ship lives on in these structures, and that the wood still groans with the memory of the ocean. The shattered remains of the Carroll A Deering may have been destroyed, but the legends were just beginning. The people of the Outer Banks are excellent storytellers, and the tale of the ghost ship of Diamond Shoals became a staple of local folklore. Fishermen reported seeing a phantom 5-masted schooner sailing through the fog on stormy nights. They claimed the ship was fully rigged, but unmanned, gliding silently over the waves before vanishing into the mist. These sightings were often accompanied by a sudden drop in temperature and a feeling of intense dread. The ocean, it seemed, was not ready to let go of the Deering or its lost crew. One particularly chilling legend involves the ship cat. As the only survivor, the 6-toed feline was taken in by a local family. However, the family reported that the cat would often stare at empty corners of the room and hiss at unseen intruders. On the anniversary of the wreck, the cat would reportedly howl mournfully, facing the ocean. Did the animal see the spirits of the lost sailors? Animals are often said to have a second sight, perceiving things that human eyes cannot. The cat's behavior served as a constant reminder of the tragedy that had occurred and the questions that remained unanswered. The legacy of Captain Wormill also haunts the story. His letters home revealed a man who knew he was walking into danger, yet felt compelled by duty and financial necessity to proceed. He was a tragic figure, a man of the old world crushed by the chaos of the new. His daughter never gave up hope that she would find out what happened to her father. She spent years writing letters and petitioning the government, but she died without ever knowing the truth. The image of the old captain standing on the deck, surrounded by hostile men, remains one of the most poignant and terrifying images of the entire saga. The fate of First Mate McClellan is equally shrouded in darkness. If he did lead a mutiny, did he survive? Did he escape in a lifeboat, only to drown in the freezing Atlantic? Or did he and his fellow mutineers make it to shore and disappear into the population, carrying their dark secret to the grave? There were unconfirmed reports of sailors in South American ports years later who bragged about being on the Deering. But these leads were never substantiated. McClellan remains a ghost in the machine of history, a man defined by his anger and his disappearance. His role as the villain of the story is cemented in the minds of those who study the case. The Diamond Shoals continue to claim ships and lives, earning their grim nickname with every passing decade. The shifting sands hide the bones of hundreds of vessels and thousands of sailors. The wreck of the Deering is just one of many, but it is the one that refuses to be forgotten. The image of the deserted ship, with sails set and food on the table, strikes a primal chord of fear in all of us. It represents the sudden interruption of life, the unknown terror that can strike at any moment, and the vast indifference of the natural world. The ocean does not care about our mysteries or our grief. Modern researchers have revisited the case using advanced technology and forensic analysis. They have modeled the drift patterns of the lifeboats and analyzed the weather records from 1921. Most modern theories lean toward a mutiny, followed by a disastrous evacuation. It is believed that after killing the officers, the crew tried to flee in the lifeboats, but were capsized by the rough surf on the shoals. This would explain the missing crew and the lack of bodies. The ocean effectively scrubbed the crime scene clean, leaving no witnesses and no evidence. It is a plausible explanation, but it lacks the definitive proof required to close the book. Yet the rational explanations never quite satisfy the human need for closure. The ghost story persists because the facts are just strange enough to allow for the impossible. The silent ship, the missing logbook, the eerie hail from the red-haired man. These are the elements of a Gothic horror novel brought to life. The Carroll A Deering serves as a mirror for our own fears of the unknown. We look at the empty deck and we populate it with our nightmares, whether they are pirates, communists, or vengeful spirits. The ship becomes a vessel for whatever darkness we imagine lurking in the deep. The wood salvaged from the wreck that was used in local construction continues to be a source of unease. Residents of the houses built with Deering timber have reported strange noises, footsteps in the attic, and doors opening on their own. Some claim to hear the sound of wind whistling through rigging, even when they are indoors on a calm day. It is as if the energy of the ship was transferred into the wood, carrying the trauma of the final voyage into the homes of the innocent. These domestic hauntings keep the legend alive, ensuring that the name Carroll A Deering is whispered with a mix of respect and fear. On stormy nights, when the wind howls across Cape Hatteras and the waves pound against the shore, you can almost hear the voices of the lost crew. The locals say that if you listen closely, You can hear the shout of the red-haired man hailing the lightship, or the desperate commands of Captain Wormel trying to maintain order. The boundary between the past and the present seems to thin on the Diamond Shoals. The tragedy of 1921 is not just history, it is a living, breathing presence in the landscape. The atmosphere is charged with the sorrow of those who were lost and the mystery of their fate. The story of the Carroll A Deering serves as a grim reminder of the dangers of the sea and the fragility of human life. It is a cautionary tale about the breakdown of order and the consequences of hatred, but mostly it is a story about the unknown. We live in a world where we expect answers, where science and technology can solve any puzzle. The Deering defies this expectation. It stands as a monument to the unsolved, a stubborn question mark in the history books. It reminds us that there are still places in this world where people can vanish without a trace. As we look back on the century that has passed, since the schooner ran aground, the mystery has not faded. It has only deepened, acquiring the patina of legend. The facts have been analyzed and reanalyzed, but the core of the mystery remains untouched. What happened in those final hours on the deck of the Deering? What terror drove the men to abandon a sound ship? The answers are lost to time, buried beneath the shifting sands of the Diamond Shoals. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and the Deering is one of its most prized possessions. The Carroll A Deering remains the ghost ship of the Outer Banks, a title it has earned through 100 years of silence. It is a story that will be told as long as there are sailors to sail the seas and people to wonder at the mysteries of the deep. The image of the 5-masted schooner sitting alone on the shoals, waiting for a crew that would never return, is burnt into the collective memory of maritime history. It is a haunting tableau of abandonment and mystery, a puzzle with no solution, a story with no end. So the next time you stand on the shore of the Atlantic Ocean and look out at the endless horizon spare, a thought for the crew of the Carroll A Deering. Think of Captain Wormel writing his fearful letters, and the red-haired man shouting into the wind. Think of the cat wandering the empty decks, and the meal growing cold on the table. The ocean is beautiful, but it is also a graveyard, and somewhere out there in the deep darkness, the truth of the Carroll A Deering lies waiting, perhaps never to be found. The lingering dread of the Deering mystery is not just about the past. It is about the realization that we are never truly safe. The sea is vast and indifferent, and it can swallow us whole, leaving nothing behind but a silent ship and a story. The ghost of the schooner sails on in our imaginations, a perpetual voyage into the unknown. The wind still whispers the names of the lost, and the waves still crash over the Diamond Shoals, guarding the secret of the deserted schooner forever. The mystery endures watching and waiting.